Is it supposed to look like that? Drek muttered, his mandibles clicking nervously. His voice carried a tone of both confusion and disbelief, a rare combination for the battle-hardened Antir warrior. His sharp gaze locked onto the peculiar figure standing a few paces ahead, illuminated by the flickering light of distant fires. The battlefield, a charred and chaotic expanse littered with the remnants of war machines and fallen soldiers, was no place for peculiarities. Yet, here stood the human warrior, a figure unlike anything Drek had ever encountered. Through the slightly scratched visor of his helmet, Drek squinted at the bizarre sight before him. The human was clad in what could only be described as a patchwork of ragged metal plates, scorched almost beyond recognition, and crude-looking armor that seemed more cobbled together than designed for battle. It was the kind of equipment Drek would expect to see on a scavenger, not a combatant in the midst of a galactic war. And yet, the human stood there, unscathed, having crossed the battlefield's fiery expanse while carrying only a single primitive-looking firearm and an absurdly tiny shield strapped to one arm. Somehow, it made it across all this, Drek thought, his mandibles twitching in irritation. All this carnage, plasma bolts still zipped through the air, each one deadly enough to melt armor and flesh alike, and yet the human didn't even have a scratch. Beside him, one of his squadmates, Chris, a burly soldier with an almost permanent scowl, grunted in disbelief. It's breathing, isn't it? That alone makes it the strangest creature on this blasted planet. Drek's gaze sharpened as he watched the human turn. The motion was casual, unhurried, as if the warrior was simply strolling through a park. As the swirling dust of the battlefield momentarily cleared, the human caught sight of Drek and his squad. Then, to Drek's utter bewilderment, the human raised a hand in what could only be interpreted as a friendly wave. By the elders, Drek muttered, his mandibles clicking in stunned confusion. Do they have no sense of propriety? Who waves on a battlefield? Chris snorted, his tone tinged with reluctant humor. Humans, that's who. They're known for two things: ignoring basic survival instincts and, well, that's about it. Drek had heard the rumors, of course. Whispers in war councils across the galaxy spoke of the Terrans, humans from a backwater death world that had somehow clawed their way to prominence. They were described as creatures of paradox, both fragile and indomitable, their resilience growing with every generation. The term, Death Worlder, was often thrown around, a descriptor that carried equal parts awe and horror. But Drek and his squad had dismissed those tales as exaggerations. No creature, they believed, could be deadlier than the Antir, a species forged by millennia of relentless war and conquest. Yet, here they were, watching one of those supposed harmless humans wander through the carnage as if it were a leisurely marketplace. The human, seemingly bored by their stunned silence, bent down to pick up a piece of metal from the ground. Drek tilted his head, his curiosity piqued despite himself. The human examined the scrap for a moment, almost as if admiring it. Then, to Drek's utter bafflement, the human hurled it across the battlefield, not as a weapon, but seemingly just for the fun of it. What is it doing? Drek hissed, more to himself than anyone else. His disbelief was echoed by another squadmate, Tyler, who was staring at the human with open horror. This is a joke, right? Tyler croaked. Some sort of psychological warfare tactic? No joke, came a new voice. Their captain, his scarred scales glinting faintly in the eerie blue light of the battlefield, had joined them from behind a ridge. His voice was low and intense, carrying the weight of authority. That human alone wiped out the entire eastern flank of our forces. 3 squads, gone. Drek felt a shiver ripple through his body. The eastern flank. That section had been fortified, a near impenetrable stronghold manned by the mightiest warriors of the Antir Empire. The thought that a single human, a creature with no apparent weaponry other than a primitive firearm, could dismantle such a force was almost too much to comprehend. The captain's orders. The captain crouched beside Drek, his armor scraping softly against the jagged rocks. Command wants it taken down, he muttered. They believe it's a scout sent to test our capabilities. We are to neutralize it before it can report back. Drek swallowed hard, his claws flexing around his blaster. Neutralize it? Captain, are we sure it can be neutralized? Look at it. The captain's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing into slits. Everything can be ended, he said, his voice like steel. We've been chosen because we are the best, the strongest warriors in the fleet. Whatever this creature is, it is still flesh and blood. The squad nodded in unison, though Drek couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The human wasn't behaving like any warrior he'd ever encountered. There was no fear, no tension, no sense of urgency. It stood atop a small mound now, gazing out at the battlefield as if admiring the scenery. "Whatever this thing is," the captain growled, "we end it here and now." The squad moved into formation, a carefully practiced maneuver designed to overwhelm even the most formidable of enemies. Drek took the lead, his blaster raised, his focus sharpening. The human glanced in their direction, its expression lighting up in what could only be described as a cheerful grin. "Greetings," the human called, its voice carrying a maddening casualness across the battlefield. "Lovely day for a scrap, isn't it?" Drek's mandibles twitched. "Who talks like that during a firefight?" The clash. Drek didn't respond to the human's bizarre greeting. Instead, he gave a quick hand signal, and the squad sprang into action. Plasma bolts lit the air as the soldiers unleashed a barrage of fire, their weapons humming with lethal precision. Each shot was aimed to disable or, if possible, eliminate the peculiar warrior who dared defy the Antir on their own turf. The human moved, or rather, it flowed. The ease with which it dodged the plasma fire was nothing short of uncanny. Each step seemed deliberate, yet it carried an air of spontaneity, as if the human wasn't merely reacting to the attacks but predicting them before they happened. It ducked, sidestepped, and rolled in a manner that would have seemed like an elaborate dance routine were it not happening amidst a deadly firefight. "What in the void is this?" Tyler shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "It's not even wearing proper armor." The human's armor didn't just look makeshift. It practically crumbled under the occasional plasma strike that managed to graze it. Yet the human itself seemed unharmed, as if the armor was merely a suggestion of protection rather than a necessity. "Focus," the captain barked, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "It's just one target. Overwhelm it with firepower." The squad regrouped, tightening their formation to concentrate their fire. Drek's mandibles clicked as he adjusted his blaster, firing a series of well-aimed shots. But the human, instead of retreating, began closing the distance between them with alarming speed. It dashed forward in erratic zigzags, dodging plasma bolts with an almost casual grace. "Stay back," Chris shouted, hurling an energy grenade toward the advancing figure. The explosion sent up a plume of dust and fire, momentarily obscuring the human from view. Drek held his breath, his claws tightening around his weapon. When the dust settled, the human stood there, entirely unscathed, save for a new scorch mark on its ragged armor. It smiled. "Nice throw," it said, its tone infuriatingly friendly. "You almost got me that time." The unthinkable counterattack. The human raised its primitive firearm, a weapon so small and archaic that Drek couldn't believe it posed any real threat. When the weapon fired, however, it wasn't the loud, booming explosion he expected. Instead, there was a sharp crack, almost insignificant compared to the roar of plasma weapons. But the results were anything but insignificant. One of Drek's squadmates collapsed, clutching their side. A tiny, smoldering hole marked the point of impact. Just one precise shot. "What is that thing firing?" Drek whispered, his voice trembling. He had faced plasma cannons, railguns, and even antimatter blasts, but he had never seen such a crude weapon cause such precise destruction. The human fired again, and another soldier fell. Panic rippled through the squad as they scrambled for cover. Drek's mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was witnessing. The human wasn't just avoiding their fire. It was systematically dismantling them, one shot at a time. A glimpse of the impossible. The captain, snarling in fury, charged forward with a vibroblade, determined to end the battle in close combat. The human didn't flinch. Instead, it sidestepped the captain's attack with uncanny ease, grabbing the blade by the hilt and twisting it out of the captain's grasp in a single fluid motion. "Nice craftsmanship," the human remarked, inspecting the weapon as if appraising an artifact in a museum. Then, to everyone's shock, it tossed the blade aside as if it were irrelevant. The captain roared in defiance, swinging a clawed hand at the human, but the warrior ducked under the blow, delivering a single, well-placed strike to the captain's midsection. The impact sent the towering Antir sprawling to the ground, gasping for breath. Drek's courage faltered. How could something so small, so poorly equipped, possess such overwhelming strength? It wasn't just skill. It was as if the human defied the very rules of combat. "You're not like the others," Drek finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The human turned to him, tilting its head in curiosity. "Others?" it asked. "You mean the other ant here? I guess I'm not, but that doesn't make me special. Just different." Drek's claws trembled around his weapon. "What are you?" The human grinned, its expression oddly warm despite the chaos surrounding them. "Survivors. That's what we humans are. You might be stronger, faster, even smarter, but we're stubborn. Stubborn enough to outlast anything the universe throws at us." Drek stared at the human, his mind reeling. It wasn't arrogance in the human's tone. No, it was something far more unsettling. Confidence. Earned, unshakable confidence. The decision the human didn't press the attack. Instead, it slung its primitive firearm over its shoulder and began to walk away, leaving the remaining Antir warriors in stunned silence. "Wait!" Drek called, his voice breaking. "Why spare us?" The human paused, glancing over its shoulder. "Spare you?" It laughed softly, the sound oddly kind. "This wasn't about you. It's never about you. We're just trying to survive, same as you. Maybe next time, think twice before starting a fight you don't understand." With that, the human disappeared into the smoke and shadows of the battlefield, leaving Drek and his squad to grapple with the impossible truth they had witnessed. For the first time in his life, Drek understood what the rumors meant when they called humans Death Worlders. They weren't the strongest or the fastest, but they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors.